Hello, welcome to this week's edition of Daily Cosa's Debrief with me, your host, Markos Moulitsas. It's a real pleasure to have you here to talk about the issues that are important to our nation and just as importantly, what you can do about them. This week's special guest is Daily Kos staff writer Lauren Floyd. We'll be talking about the Ahmaud Arbery issue down in Georgia and what we can do to try to make what is a social injustice into something that maybe some good can come out of it. But before that, we'll talk about some of the headlines that are driving the news at Daily Kos this last week. So I'm going to start off with something that I wrote. Actually, it was, I think, the most popular story on Daily Kos last week. So the headline is, Sweden never shut down. Sweden never shut down. Now its death rate and its economy are worse than its neighbors. So I wrote, quote, if nothing else, Sweden's alternative response to the virus, which was to keep everything open, pretend nothing had changed. Sweden's alternative response to the virus was a good control group. And what we're learning now is that failing to shut down hasn't just led to more deaths, but surprise, surprise, it also didn't prevent its economy from tanking. In fact, Sweden is poised for more economic pain than its neighbors. So that was surprising. So Sweden didn't shut anything down. Sweden has the largest number of single-person households in the world. About 50% of Swedes live by themselves. So with that and their world-class healthcare system and universal healthcare, they thought they could actually ride this thing out with minimal economic pain. It's not surprising that they are amongst the world's leaders in deaths per capita and rising quickly. But what was surprising was that their economy also tanked. And what we're learning, as we're learning in a lot of places, including Georgia, is that just opening things up doesn't bring back an economy, because as long as we see our fellow human beings as vectors of disease, nobody's going to want to go out. That's the problem. And we're seeing that everywhere that tries to open up prematurely. So right now, Sweden has the 5th largest death rate per capita in the world, and it's projected to have the largest economic contraction in Europe this year, according to the International Monetary Fund. And this is important not because, because Sweden is that important to us as we deal with our own issues right here. It's important because conservatives keep pointing to Sweden as an example to follow. And we had Rand Paul in a Senate hearing on Tuesday basically say we need to do the Swedish model. And apparently the Swedish model is more deaths per capita than the United States, and it's more economic havoc than what we're already experiencing in the United States. Now, it isn't just Rand Paul that's pushing the unnecessary and premature reopening of America. We've seen these protesters, these armed protesters all around the country in recent weeks. And the next headline is by David Newert, who is he is the national foremost authority on white supremacist movement and militias. And so this is obviously a busy time, unfortunately, for his beat. And he writes a headline, those armed Boogaloo protesters won't be as easy to control as their GOP backers believe. So I don't know if you know about this, but the Boogaloo is the extremist right's longtime shared violent fantasy of a violent second civil war. So when you read about the Boogaloo, they're talking about civil war. So the Boogaloo draws together elements of both the violent neo-Nazi right and the increasingly radicalized true believers of the, quote, patriot movement. Its ascendancy amongst the heavily armed segment of the movement exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic was in full evidence over the weekend at the anti-lockdown protest. So the Boogaloo, civil war, these are people fantasizing about shooting fellow Americans. Now what you'll see is that they'll wear body armor over their Hawaiian shirts. Now, what does that mean? This actually means something. Those Hawaiian shirts are a reference to the, quote, big luau. That's what they have nicknamed the war. in which they will be shooting their neighbors. Now, Republican establishment, Fox News, they've embraced these people. They call them patriots, but they can't and won't be able to control them if they decide to carry out these fantasies of civil war. And they're already emboldened. Donald Trump is cheering them on. And they are worth keeping an eye on, especially when and if we defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box this November. They will have to be dealt with. Final headline for this week is by Gabe Ortiz. Quote, "We are dying at a higher rate because we have no other choice. U.S. Latinos are devastated by the pandemic." So he writes, Gabe Ortiz writes, quote, "Frank Miranda, president of the advocacy group Hispanic Federation, tells CNN that many of these workers are being impacted because working from home is simply not an option. We are dying at a higher rate because we have no other choice," he said. "These are the delivery food people, the people that are the day workers, the farm workers. These are people that are working in restaurants. They are essential services, and they are not enjoying the protections that maybe in other industries people can have." And that's absolutely true. In fact, a big percentage of them are undocumented and have been purposely cut off from any stimulus aid that may be coming to actual American citizens and residents. We wouldn't have the country we would have right now without these people. We wouldn't have store shelves stocked with food, vegetables, meat without these Latinos. And it is absolutely unconscionable that they are being treated the way they are in this pandemic. And as a result, they are dying at much higher rates than the general population. And in fact, you're seeing a lot of red counties now impacted by COVID-19. But if you dig in, usually those are counties with meat packing plants or poultry processing plants or other food type plants. And it is the Latinos working in those factories that are getting sick and that are dying. I don't know how to put this except to say that in this time of tragedy, in this pandemic, what we've seen is that it exposes those class and racial and ethnic lines that divide us as Americans. And those who can afford the best healthcare, who have those jobs where they can work from home, they are less impacted than those who have less means, who are the working class of this country. And it is no accident that it is the Black community and the Latino community that are most heavily impacted, as usual, by yet another national catastrophe. So I guess that's a good entry for this week's special guest, which is Lauren Floyd. She is a Daily Kos staff writer focusing on issues like social justice issues. And obviously that has become a frontline issue in the progressive movement, not just with COVID-19, but with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. And so many of these social justice movements of the last few years are driven in large part by formerly marginalized communities finally having the ability to have a voice, to tell their stories, and to push for the kind of change that we as a society need. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining me. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been covering the story of Ahmaud Arbery very, very closely, obviously, from the very beginning. Can you give us some of the background of the story, please?
Absolutely. So Ahmaud Arbery was a 25-year-old Black man, a former high school football standout, an avid jogger by his friend's description. And one day he was jogging through a coastal Georgia suburb, a community, and he reportedly stopped, looked through a window of a home under construction, and then continued running. Well, according to a police report, a former Georgia cop, Gregory McMichael, spotted him, deduced he was a suspect in earlier break-ins that were happening in the area, and went to get his son, Travis, involved. So they returned to the scene in a situation that ended with Arbery dead, shot 3 times with a shotgun on February 23rd. And it took 74 days for authorities to arrest the McMichaels, ultimately on murder and aggravated assault charges. So the case is now in the 4th district attorney. two of the district attorney's offices under investigation for misconduct. And there's this push to get the U.S. Justice Department to investigate. So that's where we are right now.
So this may be the most nationalized social justice issue since Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. Why do you think this has resonated so much all across the country?
I think that the fact there's video in this incident that shows the moments leading up to Arbery's death. We actually hear the gunshots. We see a scuffle happening before he was ultimately shot. And the fact that authorities had this video the day that he was shot. So they knew this video, this evidence existed. And still, it took 74 days for them to even be arrested. And that's unusual and jarring and frustrating for a lot of people. And so that's why I think this is really picked up.
Do you think they would have been arrested had that video not been released by one of the very people involved, thinking it helped them out?
Honestly, I'm not sure. The mother, I will say that Ahmaud Arbery's mother has been extremely vocal and has been very active in advocating for justice for her son. And so she was not going to let this go. And the attorneys involved were not going to let this go. So there would have been accountability, but not the kind of accountability that looks like the vice president, the former vice president speaking out, and the president, mentioning the case. That adds a heightened sense of responsibility.
So, Lauren, you're from Georgia, correct?
From Chicago originally, and
okay.
Yes, I live in Georgia. I've been in Georgia for years. Yeah.
So, does any of this feel new to you?
I think my background in covered cases like this makes it feel a bit unusual to me, which is kind of, I feel every journalist's struggle is that some of these horrific things become normal or start to feel normal for us. And so there's that element of it. And then there's the element of being a Black woman and knowing very well what I face every day walking out of my home into rural Georgia as soon as I really step out of Atlanta and the dangers I face. So all of those elements in the background kind of make this feel, like, unfortunately, yet another case like this.
So you talk about how it feels more of the same, but is there any part of the story that actually surprised you? Or is it really all just part of that same experience?
Frankly, the two prosecutors are being investigated. That's what's surprising to me, because I've seen repeatedly, officers, either former or current police officers that are accused of shooting and killing Black people, get off time and time again. They get off, and so the fact that these prosecutors are being held accountable, at least in the very basic regard that they're going to be investigated, that's surprising to me.
So where do things go from here? What are the next steps?
So there is, like I said, there's a push to get a Justice Department investigation. There's a push to get hate crime charges, and there is also a push. There's a third person that was actually shooting the video. And there are a lot of questions about just how much of a role he played in this. So there's also a push to see him arrested and charged.
Yeah, who is that guy? I actually haven't.
Yeah, so that guy's name is William Bryan, and he has been just been, criticized for, one, not intervening, not doing anything to protect or to stop this from happening. You can see in the footage that the footage starts in a vehicle, and so you get Arbery running alongside this road while he is videotaping. You see his car coming to a stop. You see him shooting. You see him videotaping what Arbery kind of approaching one of the men in the footage. You see, and then you don't see anything. He kind of cuts away, and then you hear gunshots, and the whole time, you're kind of wondering, okay, why am I continuing to see this video? Why aren't authorities being called? You know, how big of a role did he play in this? And so those are all of the questions that are leading the public to kind of, you know, question his motives, just how involved he was.
Right. Yeah, no, it's actually kind of fascinating. So thank you so much, Lauren. If you want to get involved in bringing Arbery's murderers to justice, we have included 2 calls to actions in the show notes below. The first one is a petition. It's a Daily Kos petition urging the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the death, the shooting. Lauren, can we even trust Georgia to handle this on their own?
No more than we can trust the Justice Department.
Okay.
We can hope.
Maybe the more eyes that are on it, maybe something good will come of it.
Exactly.
So, and the second one, I'm also very, very excited about. Our friends at an amazing organization called Black Voters Matter Fund are organizing electorally to oust this district attorney who refused to file charges for 2 months. I highly encourage you to join their efforts. The links are in the show notes below. It includes joining their email list, and you can also text to be part of their SMS list as they find a candidate, recruit a candidate, and mount a campaign to rectify what is clearly unjust, unrepresentative criminal justice treatment in that county. So I urge you to look at the show notes below, join those efforts. So thank you so very much for joining us for another week of Daily Kos' The Brief. I am Markos Moulitsas, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Thank you.